has a T-coil or telecoil built in, which just needs to be activated by a hearing professional to use a hearing loop. For example, here's what a typical group presentation sounds like to someone using just a hearing aid.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're offering the following activities.
And here's what it sounds like to a hearing aid user with the help of a hearing loop.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're offering the following activities.
Unlike other assistive listening systems that require headsets, hearing loops are the only solution that uses the unique tuning to each person's individual pattern of hearing loss and doesn't require any additional equipment. And as you just heard for yourself, the difference is night and day. You can easily find all hearing loop enabled venues near you by downloading the free Loop Finder app for your smartphone or by going to loopfinder.com. So, the next time you see this sign, know that for many, it means experiencing the gift of hearing that makes their ears smile.
Welcome to Rancho Mirage, where sustainability is our way of life. Discover how you can play a crucial role in reducing power usage, embracing recycling, and participating in groundbreaking initiatives. Small changes in your daily routine can make a big impact. Shift high-energy activities to non-peak hours, moving away from using energy at peak times, especially from 4 to 9 p.m. This not only helps reduce grid stress, but can also lower your monthly bill. Create a healthier environment by composting organic waste and recycling materials. Be sure to place only organic waste to include spoiled food and yard trimmings in your green cart so it can be turned into compost and used to grow healthy plants. Don't forget to rinse any residue from your containers and cans, and to leave recyclables unbagged and loose in your blue cart. Our website has valuable information on sustainable living practices. Explore it to make a difference. Embrace sustainable living, from driving electric cars to harnessing the power of solar energy. Make your journey a cleaner, greener lifestyle. Ready to make a change? Rancho Mirage Energy Authority introduces Power Choice, a program in collaboration with Tesla. Transform your home into a sustainable powerhouse. Affordability, transparent pricing, and comprehensive benefits. Discover how Power Choice empowers you to make a positive impact on the environment while enjoying financial advantages like a $500 solar rebate. Ready to embrace the power of choice? Scan the QR code to evaluate your home's eligibility and take the leap into a sustainable future. Join us in shaping a brighter tomorrow today. Together, let's continue to embrace sustainability practices and shape a brighter tomorrow. The City of Rancho Mirage thanks you for your dedication. Join us today. Visit our website for more tips on reducing power usage and empowering your home.
Hello, good afternoon. How are you all doing today? Good to see you. My name's TJ. I'm the program coordinator here at the library. Before we get started today, just a couple of quick reminders and announcements. One is make sure you turn off your cell phone or put it on silent if you have not done that yet. The other is a lot of people are asking about our next program guide that's going to cover everything coming up in March, April, and May. This is the old one. The new one is at the printer as I speak right now. We expect it in any day, but there is a digital version online. So if you go to our website, you can actually see everything that's coming up. And if you haven't already signed up for our email newsletter, you might want to do that too, because we send out reminders about everything. So as soon as we have that ready, we send out a link. One of the reasons that it does take us a while sometime is we want to provide the best possible program schedule to you and to the community. And literally, as of last week, we were still adding some things. Actress Valerie Bertinelli reached out and said, hey, I have a new cookbook. I'd love to come. And I'm like, that sounds pretty cool. So she's going to be coming. So that'll be a good program where we're going to give away free 200 of her cookbooks. So that should be pretty cool as part of our Writers Series with the Writers Festival. So that's one of the reasons, but it should be here any day. I did go ahead and print off about lots of copies of the March calendar. So on the way out, if you want to grab one of those, it does have the listing of all of the programs coming up in March. So just an update on that. But now to get started with today's program, we've had a really great relationship with Friends of the Desert Mountains and have done this series now for a couple seasons, and it's been terrific. So it is my pleasure to now introduce today's speaker, the Director of Education for Friends of the Desert Mountains, Oscar Ortiz, and also we'll have Dr. Lynn Sweet. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. How are you doing today? Good, awesome. So today I'm here, I'm the Director of Education for Friends of the Desert Mountains. Has anybody heard of Friends already, Friends of the Desert? Oh, a lot of you have. Yeah, so we're a nonprofit here. We've been around for about 35 years, focused on conservation and environmental education. We've helped conserve over 60,000 acres of land here in the Coachella Valley. And we have also maintained over 300 miles of trails throughout the valley. So we work a lot with our hiking community. We have a lot of great volunteers. We'll also be having an event this Saturday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Palm Desert Civic Center Park. Free family event, so come on by if you want to join us. And so today we're going to be talking about climate change in the Coachella Valley. We thought it'd be great to talk to our community about what specifically we see changing here in our community. And for this presentation, we teamed up with Dr. Lynn Sweet, who is here with us today, and then also Dr. Pablo Ortiz-Partida. He's a senior climate and water scientist with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Dr. Lynn Sweet is a research ecologist at UC Riverside at the Center for Conservation Biology. So what they helped us with is really bringing some of the global data, more national and global data from the Union of Concerned Scientists. And then Dr. Lynn Sweet brought in some of the more localized data so we could build a comprehensive conversation here with our community. So some of the topics that we'll talk about today is what is climate change, some of the causes of climate change, the global and regional impacts, some of the local impacts, and then we'll talk about how do we become climate resilient. And this is interactive, so we'll be asking some questions here and trying to get some input from the crowd, so be ready to get your hands up and answer some questions here. So first question we have, and you can answer as you like, but what is climate change? Just a short sentence on how would you describe climate change? Any volunteers? Back there. The expected weather, not the actual weather. Okay, that's one way to describe it. Anybody else? Right here.
I think when there's changes in what used to be that are not necessarily consistent, like constantly changing. I always think of climate change as being responsible for that.
So the change in consistency, you're saying. So we're used to certain patterns, and now we're going away from some of those patterns, right? Definitely. Anybody else before we move on? All right, let's go ahead and move on here. So the world's average temperature is getting warmer, right? And so that is what's causing more intense and severe weather patterns. We're having longer droughts, stronger floods, more unpredictability, as you mentioned, in weather. One of the things we like to highlight as well, we're kind of moving on from global warming and going towards climate change more. Global warming was a little confusing for some people because sometimes climate change actually brings colder weather, right? And so that was a little confusing, so now we're going more with climate change is the more acceptable term here. Now, what are the causes of climate change? Anybody want to volunteer and answer here? Cows. Part of it. Give it a little bit of methane gas there. Another one here. Carbon dioxide is a huge contributor as well. Back there. Burning of fossil fuels definitely impacting our atmosphere here. One more here.
A lot of those things, are they causing the hole in the ozone layer?
The hole in the ozone layer? I think that's a little bit different. I think that was coming from different chemicals, and I think that's actually getting better now because we've reduced those chemicals. Yeah. One more back there. Deforestation, yes, because deforestation, all those trees that used to consume that carbon dioxide are not around anymore, right? So let's see, some of the causes. We're definitely seeing an increase in carbon dioxide or CO2, methane, and other heat-trapping gases. CO2 is the highest that it's been recorded in 800,000 years. In the 1950s, we were at about 270 parts per million in our atmosphere. In 2015, we're over 400 parts per million. And this is, as somebody mentioned, mostly coming from fossil fuels. One of the ways, there's always a debate, right? Is this additional CO2 coming from fossil fuels? Is it coming from volcanoes or other natural activity? And one of the ways we can see that is by carbon dating. So has anybody heard of carbon dating before? It's kind of how you can tell how old a material is, right? And so CO2 has carbon, so we can do carbon dating on that carbon and see that a lot of the additional CO2 that we're seeing in our atmosphere is actually very old. And that's what tells us that it's from fossil fuels, right? It died a long, long time ago. Those living things that produce that CO2 died a long time ago. And so that's one of the ways that scientists can determine how much is coming from fossil fuels. Now, one of the questions we get as well is, how does CO2 or carbon dioxide cause global warming, right? And so you'll see here on the left here, when you have those particles of CO2, usually you get the sunlight, right, that's warming our atmosphere, and it'll bounce off the floor and kind of go back into the atmosphere, into space. But when you have a lot of CO2 molecules, that CO2 will actually absorb that energy. So it's coming down, going up, and getting absorbed into the CO2 molecule. It vibrates, and it'll be released in a random direction. And so that direction could be up as normal, where it leaves again, but it could also be down, and it could come back and reheat the earth again. So you're actually causing like a circulation going, right, where that heat is not able to escape our atmosphere. And as you see on the right side there, the more of those CO2 molecules we have, the more of that bouncing around we have that has that radiation sticking here, or that energy sticking around in our atmosphere. Any questions before we go? All right, let's keep going. So our atmosphere is made up mostly of nitrogen and oxygen, about 90%. And so those don't absorb that sunlight in the same way, right? So when we start adding that CO2, it starts changing that temperature, and the surface and water temperature becomes hotter, which is causing some of those changes in weather patterns and changes in our natural habitats here in our environment. Some of the global impacts. So in 2015, we had the Paris Climate Agreement, where the goal was set to keep global temperatures at 1.5 degrees increase at most, right? But 7 years later, the IPCC report, written by hundreds of scientists and agreed to by 195 countries, agreed that we're on the path to double that limit by the end of the century. And so now, to limit the global warming to 1.5, which was our original goal, the report insisted that the global greenhouse gas emissions would have to peak before 2025 at the latest and be reduced by 43% by 2030. And so they're saying, by the end of this year, we should be going down, right? Our trend should be going down. Does anybody think we're there yet? I don't think so, right? So we got a lot of work to do. And to reduce our energy by 43% is a huge goal, right? And so we're looking at all the best ways that we can provide those reductions right now. Some of the global impacts, we're seeing more shortages of water supplies, increase in extreme heat events, which can be really dangerous, especially in places where people don't have air conditioning. We're seeing increasing risk of wildfires. We saw huge amounts of wildfires last year, right? Even Canada, throughout the West Coast, and even out in Europe. We're seeing rising sea levels because of the melting of the glaciers and the sea and the Arctic ice. Increasing intensity of severe storms, increasing amounts of uninhabitable areas, places where they used to have agriculture, they might not be able to sustain that agriculture anymore. We're also seeing increasing in seawater temperatures and plants and wildlife struggling to adapt, which is causing some mass extinctions throughout the world. Some changes throughout the seasons. So historically, in the summer, you'll see on the left-hand side, in the summer you would still have some snow on the mountains, and it would kind of be melting slowly, filling our reservoirs, and it kind of creates a nice system there, right? You'll still see a couple of little fires there, right, because wildfires are natural here, they're going to happen. But now, as the temperatures are warming, by the end of the century, what we're predicting is that we'll have less snow on those mountaintops. And we've already seen that in the past couple of years at times, right? Where we're seeing less snow than usual, which means that during times of drought, you don't have that water coming down slowly anymore because it's already come down as rain. More drought is leading to more wildfires, causing more damage to our homes and other areas and infrastructure. And so also, one of the things that you'll notice here, because there's less snow, I think we really need to look at snow as kind of a water reservoir, right? That's our natural reservoir that holds a lot of water there for us. And now that's why you see the states sometimes scrambling to implement more water containment projects, because it's all coming down at once, and they're trying to find new ways to contain that water since we don't have as much snow up on the mountains. Some changes in winter. Again, on the left, you'll see historically we had more snowpack on the mountains, and that was kind of a more controlled flow coming down. On the right side, you'll see with the increase in temperatures, there's less snow and more rain. So at times before we would get snow, now because it's a little hotter, it might come down as rain. And so what happens now, the earth has less time to absorb that water, and we're getting mass flooding. So because more of it is coming as rain and not as snow, you're getting more flooding. It's all coming down at once, which is causing more damage and more issues here for our communities. Any questions on these before we go? All right, we'll go to the next one. Some of the impacts of fires, so our wildfires. On the left hand, you'll see that when you have a healthy system, you have the soil that'll absorb the water and recharge the aquifer. You also have plants that'll absorb the water during rains, which helps to stabilize, any floods and water coming down. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that after there's been a large fire, those trees are now dead, right? Those roots are not absorbing water anymore, so you don't have that ability to absorb water. The soil might also have ash and debris on top, which makes it less water absorbent. It makes it more water repellent, so you'll get more of those mudslides and faster moving water throughout the system. The third thing is that you're also getting the ash and debris and toxins from the homes that might have burned, right? And those are now going into your water system. That's another impact of fires. And we actually saw that in the Paradise fires, that after all of those homes burned down, their water was contaminated for a short amount of time, and it wasn't usable because all of the contaminants that were coming from the homes that had burned down. I mean, you look around your house, right? How many plastics do we have? Paint that's around us, synthetic materials that are around us. So if all that were to burn into the ground, it can cause some contamination. So definitely need to look at how we change our building practices to be able to build more sustainable homes that aren't going to contaminate our water sources and soil sources during these catastrophes. Some impacts on the water system. As we mentioned, there's reduced snowpack. The warming is changing the ecosystem and crop dynamics, so crops are struggling right now. This year, our date harvest seemed to be pretty low. It ended a couple months too early. That's what we've heard from some of the date farmers because of the changes in rain patterns. You also see wetter wet years, drier dry years, saltwater intrusion due to sea level rise. We're actually seeing that in the Sacramento Delta, not just because the sea level is rising, but because now with the droughts and more human consumption, you have less water coming into the ocean through the river, right? So usually you have a balance where the ocean's here and the river's coming and they're kind of balanced out. Now you have less water coming out and the seawater's coming in. And so now places upriver are having to start desalination plants because they have salt water in the river systems there. So that's going to be another expensive process, high energy consumption that's having to be done because of our heavy water use. And now we'll talk about what does climate change look like in our region. And before that, I'll bring up Dr. Lynn Sweet, who's going to be handling the next part of our presentation. Dr. Lynn Sweet, who is a research ecologist at UCR. Let's give her a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Oscar. So glad to be here. Thank you. So I'm a research ecologist at UCR. So we do conservation biology research in the Coachella Valley and around the Mojave Desert. And our job is to apply science to different conservation problems. So for instance, here we're looking at the effect of climate change on various animal and plant communities. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the examples of our research. But before that, I'm going to talk about just what does climate change look like locally in our region. So again, we have the longer, hotter, dry periods. And what we could see is shrubs and trees that could die back at lower elevations. So the lower elevation limit is often where a species, that's the hottest temperature they can tolerate. And so as the climate warms, that might push that limit up and up and up the mountain. What's amazing about the Coachella Valley is we have a real diversity of topography. So we have lots of mountains for plants and animals to climb, but we do have to understand what might happen. So we look at animals, plants, and insects that might shift their habitat. We're going to have worsening, again, conditions we have to think about the people that live here, because the people are an integral part of the system. You belong here, we all belong here, and we want to enjoy our natural spaces, and there are people that, work here. So part of the issue is to look at conditions for farm workers in the workforce. We could also see less shrub cover that could leave us vulnerable to things like dust movement, air quality issues. We did see that, that tropical storm that came through last fall that deposited a lot of silt around the valley that then caused air quality issues. And things like that, hurricanes and these really periodic events could happen, more frequently, more extreme events. So that's something that we see a tie there. So again, implications for respiratory diseases. And with hotter temperatures, we have more energy use. We all turn on that AC a little bit earlier, and more emissions in the way that Oscar talked about. So what does, how else does our climate function in our region? So we do have here in the desert actually a lot of carbon that's actually stored in our soils and in our geology here, which is really cool. So unlike a tropical forest where you have all that above ground carbon, biomass that you might think about when you're like, save the rainforest, prevent the CO2 from being emitted. Well, here we have actually a bunch of carbon stored in our soils because it's so dry that when it's collected, it actually just stays in the soil. It's known as caliche, and we actually have a piece of calcium carbonate in the back that you can check out after the lecture. But the goal for us, so we want to keep that carbon in the soil, and that happens best if we don't disturb the soil. So leaving those wild spaces intact, preserving our environment actually helps to keep carbon in the soil and not being emitted. So we also might see the valley floor, this whole sweet valley that we love, change and look different. We might have fewer different plants. The plant communities might change up. We do have a need for policymakers and those who can to make more urban green spaces. That does something like cool down neighborhoods. And what's cool also about having more urban green spaces and trees planted along streets, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that that provides just more walkable space for people. And again, we'll go into more of the climate solutions in a few minutes. Trails and access might be more restricted due to closures. We have these big storms that causes erosion and damage. And that leads to, not as many recreational opportunities. So, these are things that really, matter to us. I want to say Dr. Patrick Gonzalez, who's at UC Berkeley. I worked with him out in the desert in Joshua Tree. We were measuring Joshua trees out on the landscape with a volunteer group. He's done some research, and he provided me some more information. The arid Southwest already experienced some of the sharpest declines in precipitation or rainfall in the contiguous 48 states. And we're seeing these increased levels of aridity, which means hot and dry. So very arid and hot temperatures that have been seen for 1,300 years. And these higher CO2 levels, as Oscar explained, lead to those higher temperatures due to that trapping factor. And so if you look at all other factors that could possibly explain these temperature rises we're seeing, less than 3% of those sources could really explain the rise. The rest of it's really up to the extra CO2 that we're emitting due to transportation and anthropogenic sources. All right, so to look at just specifically what we might see in the valley, I might try to use this pointer. Let's see. Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. Well, I may not. So here we go. On the left, we actually have a graph showing this is for the mid-century. So this is what we might expect to happen around 2050. And this is what climatologists have put together. Basically a small, very specific report for our desert region, which is really cool. So we have on the y-axis or the x-axis, we have time. So November to May. And in the middle, you have your lovely winter season. And we have, on the graph, we have temperature. And that green line is at 85 degrees on both graphs here. So we'll start with the left-hand one. So in the left-hand one, you have a couple of different lines there going basically down, down in temperature in the winter and then back up for the summer. We all know that. But as we might see with climate change, we have a couple different future scenarios. So climatologists put together, based on IPCC data, some different predictions about what might happen due to all of this extra CO2. And one of the scenarios is called moderately mitigated. So that means there are policy changes, we do something about the issue, we reduce CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the blue line there. So that's what the temperature might look throughout the year under moderately mitigated scenario. So again, it's just a step up from that historical, swoop of temperature that we see. Business as usual, that red scenario, is a representation concentration pathway, RCP 8.5, that is basically as if there are no policy changes. We just, business as usual, do the same thing we're doing right now with no change. We hope that doesn't happen, and we think that maybe that won't happen, but that's what the temperature could look like mid-century there. So again, that swing of temperature being rised. So on the right-hand side, we have end of century. So it's the same graph, but notice that all of the lines are just cranked up. So we see the whole, throughout the year, the minimum temperatures, all of this is just cranked up so that we're seeing hotter temperatures year-round. And what that means is that for snowbirds, for instance, when you arrive, it might be hotter. And when you leave, it might still be hotter. So that's something that's very significant to your personal, recreation, health, and your enjoyment of this amazing place we live in. So. Okay, more doom and gloom. So we'll get to the solution soon. So I just wanted to point out changing rainfall. What's interesting about rainfall is it's actually a little bit difficult to predict based on the various factors that cause when storms come in and the different shifting of the different sort of events that makes that happen. But in general, sort of half of the scenarios think we might get more rainfall, about half think we might get a little bit less rainfall overall. However, so we have, sorry about that. Okay. Okay, sorry. All right. Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, so this is looking at the average wettest day of the year. So while the overall, over the whole year, you might see overall increase or overall decrease in rainfall, we do know that we might have more of these really extreme events. So the highest rainfall day of the year might actually increase the amount of rain that's dropped in one day by about 1/3. So under the most severe scenario on the right, we might really see the average of wettest day of the year really be much wetter. So again, it's the extremes that we're really worried about, things that produce those big, sort of disastrous events. Okay, I think I'm going the right direction. Okay, all right. And so in other things that we think about as biologists because it affects the landscape is winds. Predictions are a little uncertain as to winds, again, because of that, the various factors that influence that. So we try to express that, what's called uncertainty as scientists. The average wind speeds may change, pretty subtle, but the majority of desert winds are, again, influenced by heat, differences in heat. So probably there will be an upward trend in wind, but further research is needed. But for me, this is necessary to maintain these sand-driven ecosystems. If you've driven around the valley to some of the sandy spaces, you see the beautiful dune verbena. It's blooming right now. It's the pink, carpets you see. Our wonderful sand ecosystems need sand, and they actually need wind to make that sand, so to maintain that. So that's important there. So we want wind, but maybe not too much. It's also a factor in propagating wildfire. So maybe we don't want too many of those winds, especially if in the LA basin, those Santa Ana winds can really drive fires at the end of the season in the fall. And it's a major economic factor, so maybe we do want wind. We have wind energy production. But then it ties into air quality in the Salton Sea. So it's a very complex issue. And just going to talk about a few of the different impacts to vegetation and wildlife that we expect to see with climate change. On the left, we have a datura flower, one of our lovely native wildflowers, and on the right, you have a Mojave Desert tortoise. So we did a study a few years ago. We published it in 2019. And so that's a picture of Joshua Tree National Park, and that's our sort of mapping boundary. And you could just pay attention to the gray blob. That's what we predicted as suitable habitat for Joshua trees currently. So that's where we predict about Joshua trees could occur based on, we took point data for where Joshua trees occur, and we took climate data, and we made a computer model to predict where else could they occur in the landscape. We drew a big shape, essentially. Or the computer did. And then you have what we predicted for the end of century. And this is under that, actually it's moderately to highly mitigated scenario. So under that scenario, we gave the computer an example of future climate under the mitigated scenario, and what it spit out was this. So you see on the right-hand side, a greatly reduced gray polygon. So that's what we expect to be suitable habitat for Joshua trees. at the end of century, even if we mitigate, due to climate change. Luckily, Joshua trees are very tough as our desert plants. We have our resilience out here in the desert. So we're hoping that there's time, maybe a slow decline. We're hoping this doesn't happen overnight. We believe it won't happen overnight, but this is just something that people care about and we should think about. Another example here was we predicted the change in where one of our beautiful wildflowers, apricot mallow, might occur due to climate change in the future. So on the map there, so that's the valley. In the yellow, in the lowest area, that's historic habitat that might be lost. The green is what we call refugia, or where species are right now that they won't have to move or migrate anywhere to persist into the future. So that's called our refugia in green. And then blue is potentially new habitat. And animals and plants that can move, they probably will. They'll move to that newer habitat. And so some species can do that, some species can't. Notably, Joshua trees don't actually move very far, so we might have to help them. But for the mallow, hopefully, that'll be able to be moved, by rodents. So that's one example. And then we did another habitat model for a different plant. So this is sweet bush, beautiful plant that you might see out on the landscape as you're hiking. So this is our habitat model for sweet bush. You can see yellow, habitat loss, green, maintained, and blue, future habitat. This is an aster, which means that it has seeds that might blow into that new habitat, so that's all good news. And what ties these together is the chuckwalla. So these are both food plants for our wonderful desert lizard that you might see out on a hot rock on a hot day, the large lizard, chuckwalla. And these, when you think about climate change impacts to, especially animals, the animal, might survive, but it also needs its food plants to survive, right? So we looked at where the chuckwalla could occur, but also the food plants could occur. And maybe we might see an average decrease of about 32% in their foraging area. So again, it's a complicated issue, but we as ecologists try to piece these things together so we can help, predict where to put parks and where to conserve land in order to inform land management. And lastly, another thing that we look out really, really close by here is our wonderful flat-tailed horned lizard. It occurs nowhere else in the world except, through these the southern desert area. It's a cute little lizard. And what's neat is we've been studying it for a very long time. Dr. Cameron Barrows originally founded the lab that we have out here in the desert, our CCB lab. And he started monitoring these a long, long time ago. And he looked at this, and we've discovered that the population, he's looked at the fluctuations. It doesn't actually correlate exactly with rainfall, which is cool. So it doesn't just boom and bust every time we have a wet or a dry year. So that's kind of good, maintains a consistent level. But it is impacted by Sahara mustard. Sahara mustard is an invasive species. It's an example of another sort of threat or stressor to our native ecosystems. So not only do we have climate change, we also have invasive species or different species coming in. We also have land use change. So a lot of threats. So we looked at the data, and basically we were able to make a model. So high rain, more Sahara mustard, less native plants, less harvester ants, which are actually their prey. And the harvester ants are the primary food for the flat-tailed horned lizard. So again, as ecologists, we have to look at all of these different connections to understand what might happen. So, okay. And so, again, I'm giving you all this gloom and doom, and we know that that's not really motivating to people, but as part of being resilient, we feel it's really important to just be informed. Be informed about what might happen, all those things that you care about. So with that, that's my section on the local impacts. And I'll bring up Oscar again to talk about resilience. Thank you.
All right, let's give Dr. Lynn Sweet another thank you for all of her great research. Thank you. All right, so we have another question for the audience. How do we create a resilient Coachella Valley? How are we going to get ready for all these changes in weather, water conservation? Any ideas here? More desert landscaping, that's a great one, right? We know that grass uses a lot of water, doesn't provide a lot of habitat benefits for our wildlife or cooling for our neighborhoods, right? So that's definitely a big one that we want to promote here, more desert landscaping. More solar power, definitely, especially if you look at the eastern Coachella Valley all the way to the border of Mexico, the incentives aren't really there for solar. So there's a lot of homes most homes do not have solar in that area. So definitely looking for more incentives there and how to promote more solar power. And it's better when we do it on the homes, right, than in the desert landscape. So finding ways to do it where land has already been disturbed, as we heard from Dr. Lynn Sweet. We don't want to disturb more land and disturb all that carbon that's stored in our deserts. So how can we do it on areas that are already developed? One more. More education, definitely more education. The more people that are educated and are knowledgeable on these issues, the better we're all going to be, right? So let's see what we got here. Education for all ages. That's the first one. The more we know, the better we can assist, right? And that's definitely one of our key things here for both of us, both of our organizations, is how do we spread this information, spread good information, right? The right information out to help people understand these topics, help our youth to start thinking about this and getting those new ideas coming along so they can better assist us as well. Reducing consumption, fossil fuels, plastics, other pollutants. I think consumption in general, right? Everything that we buy, everything that we use is going to use up water, uses up energy, and so trying to be more responsible about how we consume and what we consume. Innovation in terms of energy, construction, transportation, and agriculture. Somebody was mentioning solar panels, right? How do we increase our solar power? Also right now, there's that battle between hydrogen and batteries, right? Which one's going to move forward or which one's best for different reasons? Construction, we mentioned how do we start I was talking with some people earlier, how do we start using earth materials again for construction, right? Like adobe used to be used to conserve energy and also was preventative of fires as well. So how do we look back at some of these older tactics to provide sustainable infrastructure? Agriculture as well, we're going to have to be innovative with that because as we're seeing with these changing climates, we're having trouble, some of our farmers are having trouble with their yields, and the changes in temperatures are changing the outcomes of their crops. Another thing is understanding issues of environmental justice. So understanding that in some areas there's going to be different problems than in our areas, right? So even if you look at a map right now and look at the eastern Coachella Valley compared to the western Coachella Valley, you'll see a lot more green in the western Coachella Valley, right? And that's going to help mitigate some of that increased heat over the years. And so we need to be aware that in the eastern Coachella Valley, we're going to need more of that urban greening down there, and we might need some more help in that sense. Supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion in science, again, for the same reason that the more we have people from different areas, the more we can understand the different issues in those different areas from people who have experienced those issues in our community. So having as many people from different backgrounds as possible in these spaces of environmentalism and being able to bring different perspectives. Understanding where to find further information about natural phenomena, right? So if we just send people off to the internet, that's not going to work, right? We need to lead them to good leaders in our community, good researchers, which is, why we partnered up on this lecture with the Union of Concerned Scientists and UCR, because we knew we needed more expertise. We needed to team up with good people to bring in good information here for our community. And incorporating traditional and native traditions for caring for the land. So looking at the past practices of this land, at the methods that the Cahuilla use here for infrastructure, for water, for using all of the natural resources in the best ways possible. Definitely important for our communities as well. Water conservation, somebody mentioned less lawns and more native plants, right? That's huge for us. And one of the things that we want to show people is that how just that one conversion can benefit in so many different ways. If you start planting native trees around your home instead of grass, you might actually be able to shade your home, right? And that will reduce your emissions because now your home's going to be cooler, you use less air conditioning, you're also using less water, you're providing habitat for the native species. It might actually be edible too, right? Did you guys know that the Palo Verdes, the beans are edible? Yeah, I didn't know that till this year. I'm eating them all the time now. Yeah. They're everywhere, yeah. But they're really good. They taste like edamame, so that's amazing. Urban greening and shade equity is another one, as we mentioned earlier, how the different parts of our valley have different levels of shade, right? So being aware of that and recognizing that some of our communities may need more help to be able to sustain these really hot temperatures. And lastly, research. Understanding these trends and what is coming in the future is really important. So being able to support our partners who are doing great research here and sharing that research with our communities as well, right? So that we're all on the same page and moving forward as one community here. Question. Oops, sorry.
How do you describe urban green and less lawns? What is your definition of urban green?
Urban greenings.
Instead of native plants and lawns?
Yeah, so you're asking the difference between urban greening and less lawns, right? Yeah, they do kind of look opposite, right? So when we're talking about urban, at least in my perspective, when I'm talking about urban greening here locally, I'm looking at how do we do urban greening with native plants. So it can be, right? So you can have like the mesquites, right, that can provide shade, the palo verdes that can provide shade, jojoba trees, those big bushes, sweet bush that can be pretty big as well. So we have one sweet bush that's about this tall right next to our office that covers one of the walls there. So I think more of the large bushes that can provide some of the cooling effects. But even when we're talking about small plants, that can still be good for some of our pollinators, right? So maybe those plants don't give as much shade or cooling impacts, but they're important for other pollinators and maybe other wildlife in our communities. But that's definitely one of the things that we thought about, because as we told people to remove their lawns, one of the things that we were seeing when we saw desert landscaping was people using a lot of rock and stone, right? But they weren't adding any greenery, and what it started doing was creating heat islands. So it started increasing the heat in certain neighborhoods because you were removing the grass but not providing any other greenery. And so the native plants allow us to add greenery but reduce the amount of water. So some of the trees that I started experimenting in my backyard, and some of the trees that I have in the summer, you'll water them once every week or 2 weeks. And that's it. And that's at the hottest time of the year, right? Right now, I haven't watered them in months, and they're fine. And so these plants allow us to provide that urban greening, but without the high water intensity that some other plants. Yeah, native planting. Yeah. No, I understand. That's true. It can be a little confusing. Do I have another question there? Yes.
City encouraging native plants.
Mm-hmm. I'm a city official. I'm just kidding. No, it's true. And the question was, we don't hear this from our government very much, right, about the native plants. And you're asking, why aren't we hearing this more from our elected officials? I think it's kind of new. I'm a council member in the city of Indio, and I sit on the Southern California Energy and Environment Committee, and I'm bringing this up like every other meeting, because I know it's not going to get brought up if we don't. So we are sharing this information at the regional level and trying to get it into more conversations. I think when you look at it, it makes sense dollar-wise, sustainability-wise, in a lot of different methods. So I think it's coming. It's coming soon. Yeah, we're changing those conversations in there too. Thanks. Question here? Artificial lawn? Yeah, and that. It is. It's good for water conservation, right? I think there's certain good things and bad things about the artificial lawns. The good thing is that it saves a lot of water. One of the issues that they're finding is that some of those plastics contain PFAS, which is can contaminate our water sources. So that's very new. And so all these things are always changing. We're always going to keep adjusting more and more, right, to see what's best for our community here. One other question here? How do you balance the plant to rock ratio to make sure that you're still saving water, but you're also keeping it cool? You know what? I don't have a good answer for that, honestly. I know for a city program that we actually just started, we told people, we're going to give you an extra $1 per square foot of lawn you remove if you put a native tree for every 250 square feet. So that would provide some shade, and it would give you an extra rebate there. That's one of the, but it's not a very scientific answer. Yeah. We had one more question back there. Yes.
This is more a comment to this gentleman's point. I just think, knowing human nature, people that come to these sorts of events are conscientious, they're concerned.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people really just don't care. Or they're just too lazy, or they're not educated, or I think legislation, it just surprises me that we can't legislate some of this stuff.
Yeah.
You're like water and using plastics, but why can't we just say, each home is limited to so much water?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
to me is more practical.
So you're asking more like why isn't there more legislation that kind of demands some of these conversions for saving water or for converting some of these things? I think just the way our government is, right, it's always more left up to the freedom of people. But I think the way that we get around that is education, right? Education, like, there's a room full of people right now. This is pretty nice. And I think the more that we spread that education, because when we do get past the, convenience of it, because I feel like a lot of things we do for convenience. It's easier for me to use more water, right? Or it's easier for me to just do a lawn and just like everybody else. But I think it's a cultural change that needs to happen, right? And it comes with education. It comes with more tools. It comes with educating our youth, especially. That's why we focus on them so much too. They have the energy and they'll go bug all their parents to go do what they're doing. So getting more people on the team. Let me check myself on time real quick before I take any more questions. I think we're okay. We'll take two more. Yes.
The Coachella Valley Water District did a really good job during the drought. They did require people, like the complex we live in, was required to reduce their water use by 50%.
Yeah.
So there were some legislation in that sense.
You're right, and there are some legislations that require that reduction in water use depending on how severe the drought is, right? There's different tiers that'll kick in, and there's certain times where, for instance, you can't water your lawn outside unless it's like every other day or something like that. Different regulations that kick in, that's right. Back there.
I was actually going to comment the same thing. It's a continuum for government to decide a carrot versus a stick approach.
Mm-hmm.
Right now they got the carrot, and they'll pay you to remove green grass in order to reduce your amount of water usage. It's only if it gets really bad that they would then turn to regulation, like has happened in the Phoenix area.
That's true.
The water is so bad that they're starting to restrict usage. But I don't think, my sense is that we're not there yet here, and so they're trying to incentivize people
Yes.
to reduce water conservation or reduce water usage now to prevent it from getting worse, and then they'll have to bring in the stick approach.
Yes.
You're only going to be able to use X amount of water.
And just for everybody online, I'll repeat that. So you're saying that right now there's incentives, right, that are trying to promote water conservation, but the restrictions really come when it gets more severe, and then they have to come in and say, no, we're in a bad situation. Everybody needs to stop now. That's true. And maybe that conversation, maybe some people could argue maybe that needs to happen sooner, right? That maybe we're doing it too late, but that's a whole different conversation. Question here.
On the subject of education, and this is more of a personal anecdote, just speaking to people, most of us don't know how much water we use.
That's true.
The average person, how much do you use in a month? Usually, eyes glaze over.
That's true. A lot of people don't really recognize how much water they're using, right?
Just by paying attention to a meter, just as a personal situation, I dropped our water use by a third.
There you go.
I haven't even noticed it in the greenery. It's just using too much. Oh, everything looks okay.
Yep.
Try dialing it down. What is it really
Yeah, definitely. So
adjusting it? And my graphs of the water bill are between last year's use and this year's use just by paying attention.
awesome. Yeah, definitely paying attention just to what's happening in your home, and you start realizing just how much water you use for just one shower, right? Or one laundry load. I actually set up my washing machine this year to go out to my garden, and so I use a biodegradable soap, and then it goes out right into my native plants garden, so it waters all the native plants and reduces my water use a little bit. Yeah. Question here.
This is just more or less a comment. I applaud you on the three working together.
Mm-hmm.
And wondering, have you reached out to our indigenous Korean Indians
Mm-hmm.
that are doing good things also? Maybe we should all more work together.
Yes, the indigenous community. We actually have one project that we're working on right now, which is called the Desert Lake Shore. So we did a community engagement process it's actually, this is a property that was donated to Friends of the Desert Mountains, and it has a lot of artifacts there. So petroglyphs and fish traps. And so what we're going to do there is do an outdoor educational center, hopefully, right? We're looking for the funding right now. Yeah, this is going to be in Thermal near the fish traps. And so there, actually, part of that would be a native plants garden where people would be able to learn how native plants were used by the Kauai and still are used by the native Kauai. And so people can learn a little bit more about the native plants here and how they were used, and even the sustainable building practices, all those kinds of things. Yeah, definitely. And I do want to have a little bit of time for people to check out our booths here in the back. So, other things you could do to make a more resilient Coachella Valley, definitely join us. Come out and support some of our events. If you would be able to, we do accept donations as well. We're a nonprofit, so for more information, you can visit us here in the back. Our calendar of events is online as well. We do a lot of guided hikes, community events, and other activities here in our community. Also want to share this. This is from Dr. Lynn Sweet, her research. So they're getting some feedback about climate change in the Coachella Valley. So if you would like, you could take a picture of the QR code or use the QR code, or you could also get some information from them here in the back and to be able to get some of that data. So what they're doing is collecting information from around the Coachella Valley, different communities, to see what's important to our communities in terms of climate change and what kind of actions they want to see done here in our community to improve climate resilience. So that would be really helpful if you guys could help us out with one of those surveys. I'm sure Dr. Lynn Sweet's team would really appreciate it. And that's all we have for today. Thank you. Appreciate it.